Hello, I'm Dr. Alisa, and just a super quick note before we begin. Please know this is not medical advice. I'm simply here to share a perspective, and it's one that makes sense to me. It's completely shifted how I see symptoms, healing, and the human body. So, again, please take what resonates, stay curious, and know that you are always in charge of your own health journey. So, before I walk you through what Germanic healing knowledge is, I want to share why this matters so deeply to me. So, for me, this isn't just about health, it's about elevating how we understand the body, how we support each other, how we stop operating from fear and start seeing the body for what it really is, which is intentional, purposeful, and always working for us. So, my journey here started with questions that no one, not in medical school, not in the alternative world or functional world, which is what I was in, could answer. I was asking, why do symptoms show up in the first place? Why do some people get sick and others don't? And why does healing feel so effortless for some and impossible for others? Why can Aunt Jane smoke a pack a day and eat only white foods her entire life and live till she's 95? How come Uncle Joe runs marathons and eats super clean and he gets a terminal diagnosis at 45? Right? So I was seeing this in practice. And while my patients were getting better with lifestyle adjustments and things like that, there was still a lot of questions that were unanswered. And then I found Germanic healing knowledge, or Germanic healing knowledge found me. And I remember hearing it for the first time. And I was like, why isn't everyone talking about this? Right? Everything clicked for me. And I started to, and I just didn't just take it for, like, when I heard it, it made sense. And I didn't just automatically assume, okay, yes, this is the paradigm or this is the direction that I want to go in. It was, okay, now let's take this information and let's start to observe. Let's start to see how this shows up in my own experience, in my life. And oh my goodness, it did. It really did. And unfortunately, to the point where my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. And at this point, when I had discovered Germanic healing, it was during or close to the time my mom's passing. I started to notice these patterns, not just in myself, but in patients, in my mother who had this terminal diagnosis. And I was a bit offended. I was like, if we have access to this level of truth and understanding, why are we still doing things the way that we are? Right? And so, of course, like I said, this became personal. My mom was vibrant. She was full of life. She had no history of smoking or any major illness. She really wasn't the person that you would picture to be labeled with a terminal diagnosis. And I won't get in too deep into this. You can read about it on my Substack. I have an article there all about it. But when I discovered Germanic healing knowledge, it was too late. Okay. My mom was really fighting for her life at this point. Medical interventions had taken over. I remember the nurse telling us that the amount of morphine she was on was equivalent to what like horses could handle. And I mean, that was rare. So she was holding on. And so definitely just like a little honor to my mom. I do want to thank her. And they say there's no accidents, right? I don't know if I would be able to see the connections as well as I did had all of this not happen. So I could see, the fear, the conflict shocks, the misunderstandings, the bone metastasis. Everything just makes sense when you understand Germanic healing knowledge. So it is my mission to share it, and it's an honor to do so. And this isn't to say modern medicine has no place. Absolutely not. Trauma care can be life-saving, but when it comes to chronic illness and long-term healing, if we are honest, the current system fails us and it does not have the answers. And this is where Germanic healing knowledge gives us a different lens. It's one that doesn't rely on guesswork, control, or suppression, but it gives us understanding, clarity, and peace. Most systems, Western, alternative, and even functional or naturopathic, we're still treating symptoms as problems to fix. However, the body's not broken, and that's the key difference with understanding Germanic healing knowledge. Understanding that we are nature and nature doesn't make mistakes. Everything is always working for us when it comes to our symptoms. They're meaningful adaptations. That is the key with Germanic healing knowledge, the key difference. So symptoms are not something to fear. The body's way of healing. And I'll go into this in more detail as the presentation goes on. But as you listen, I just invite you to stay curious and ask yourself, what brings me peace? What feels best? What information feels good to me? If you're here, you're already curious and you're already open to a different way of thinking. But what I will say is when we cling too tightly to fear-based beliefs, will always find evidence to support them. And I work on this all the time in my consults is, what are you choosing to believe, right? Because we can easily just choose a belief that feels good and that feels true. Some people call this work La Medicina Sagrada, which is like my favorite name for it, the sacred medicine. And because that's exactly how it feels to me. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with an open heart. And yeah, this has changed everything for me. And I believe it can do the same for you. Because when there's a more compassionate, biological, and sacred way to understand illness, we deserve to know it and then choose from ourselves from here. So like I was saying, listen, see if it feels good. If it doesn't feel good, leave it. That's totally fine. When you are learning Germanic healing knowledge, you cannot look through the same lens that you would conventional medicine or functional and naturopathic. You literally need to take your conventional medical glasses off and put on new ones. Just keep that in mind because a lot of people try to blend paradigms, and that's where it can get really confusing. So when you're trying to like blend the worlds together or blend the models, it doesn't really work. Here we have a little comparison between conventional medicine and holistic medicine. Holistic medicine includes naturopathic and functional, all of those. And so conventional medicine, right? We have disease and symptoms are bad, random, or genetic. Okay. Microbes and viruses are our enemies. We need external help to survive. So this is very fear-based, right? Avoid germs, suppress symptoms. The power is outside of you. You need doctors to heal. You need medication to heal. You need testing to prove that you're okay or to see if something's going wrong, right? It's very much that like machine mentality, okay? And then we have holistic medicine, and now it's kind of just dressed differently, but the fear is still there, just pointing at different things, maybe mold, parasites, toxins, right? That wellness space, so they say, can actually still be very, very fear-based because it still sees symptoms as bad, promotes detoxes, supplements, clean eating, again, still putting power on protocols outside of you. So still put some power back into the patient or person, but there's still fear there and still the idea that something externally needs to be controlled. Okay, and then we have Germanic healing knowledge that teaches that symptoms are meaningful, your body is wise, and chronic issues essentially are just a healing process that keeps getting interrupted. Microbes are purposeful helpers activated by the brain to restore tissue. And healing becomes possible when we resolve the conflict that initiated the symptom. Again, I'll get into this in more detail. So you want to think of it like this. For chronic symptoms, so if you're wondering, okay, well, why have I, had this rash forever, for example, think of it like this. Your body is trying to finish a project, but every single time it gets going, someone comes in and erases the progress. Someone is the unprocessed, unresolved emotional shock being re-triggered. So let's use the skin as an example. Skin is the epidermis, okay, not corneum skin. Corneum skin would be more like acne related symptoms. So skin, eczema, psoriasis, separation conflicts. So wanting or not wanting contact. Okay, so if you are constantly being re-triggered, but then you're going to continue that repair phase, right? Because you're going to keep going through it. So that is how we have a deeper understanding of chronic symptoms and chronic illness in Germanic healing knowledge versus holistic and conventional. And I'm sure some of you listening have heard of the book Emotional Code, okay? It is very important to note that Germanic healing knowledge is not psychosomatics, okay? It's not, and it's not another modality or protocol. So it's not something you do, okay? It's not something you take. It is something that you embody and something that you just understand, okay? It's the innate language of our body. It's essentially happening whether we think so or not. So whether we choose to believe in this, it's happening all the time. And one of the most incredible things about GHK is how specific it is, and that's because it's based on embryology. So every organ in your body was formed from one of three layers in the womb. So there's the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm, and each of those layers is linked to a specific part of the brain and a specific type of conflict. So I just mentioned separation conflict as an example. That's a type of conflict. There's tons of them, and a predictable tissue response will happen in response. And that's why GHK is like a map. So once you know what tissue is affected, you can actually trace it back to its brain region and then to the kind of conflict that likely triggered it. So it's not random, it's not guesswork, it's biology, and we have this beautiful map thanks to who discovered it. I will talk about him in a moment, Dr. Hammer. And that's what makes this approach so clarifying, right? It gives us a roadmap to understand what the body is doing and why. There is no questions. We have the answers. It's beautiful. And then here, just a reminder, I already mentioned this, but it's not biological. It's not just emotional or energetic. My mentor actually calls it psychobiological, which makes the most sense to me because it integrates the psyche, which is our subconscious perception. It refers to how your subconscious perceived an event. So it's not the event itself, but how it landed for you. Or, a couple gets a divorce. It could be two different experiences for them. Okay, one, it could be a separation conflict. The other one, it could be a territory loss conflict or a territorial anger conflict. Okay, so perception is really everything. Every symptom has a purpose, and it starts with a conflict shock, something unexpected, isolating, and intense that the psyche registers. And I put this quote in here: the greatest medicine of all is to teach people how to not need it. Because just going back to the story of my mom, I see people all the time be diagnosed and go through treatments that, when you understand from the GHK lens, don't actually make sense for healing. Where did Germanic healing knowledge come from? It came from this wonderful man, Dr. Hammer. Meet Dr. Hammer, Dr. Reiki Gerd Hammer. He was a German MD who made this discovery. He was a surgeon, a researcher, a father. He had several surgical patents. He invented some scalpels, and he did really, really well with his inventions. Because of this, him and his wife, actually, she was also a physician, they moved to Italy, and he actually worked pro bono in underdeserved communities to provide medical care and help them. And there's videos of them playing music and singing, and he was just definitely extremely known for his kindness and curiosity and desire and drive to improve healthcare. So I definitely want to just give a little shout out to him and thank him. And so what led to his discovery, in 1978, his son Dirk was accidentally shot, and despite multiple surgeries to try and keep him alive, he died months later in Dr. Hammer's arms. This was obviously very emotionally distressing and unexpected and intense for Dr. Hammer. Soon after Dirk's passing, Dr. Hammer, previously healthy, was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and that made him start to question things. He was like, wait a second, I've always been healthy, like what's going on here? There must be, like, he hypothesized that there must be some sort of connection between the loss of his son Dirk and his testicular cancer. So while working in oncology, he interviewed cancer patients and he actually studied their brain CTs, okay, CAT scans. What he found was remarkable. He found that every testicular cancer patient had a distinct brain lesion in the same spot. Okay, he called this the Hammer focus. He found that from interviewing them, every single one that had the testicular cancer had the exact same lesion in the brain. The brain scans look like this, and you can't really see it here, but there is a little lesion. There's yellow arrows around it if you can see it. He discovered that they all suffered a profound, emotional, unexpected, another keyword, loss. Okay, so this marked the start of a new way of understanding symptoms and disease. So at first, he thought this just applied to cancer. Okay, because then he started to interview the women with ovarian cancer, and he learned that after doing CTs and all of his case studies, that actually ovarian cancer is also profound loss conflicts as well. So not only did he find that every testicular cancer patient and ovarian cancer patient, and cancer in general, not only did he find that they all had a specific lesion, a ring pattern in the same spot in the brain, but these lesions, we now call them the Hammer foci, showed up again and again in people with the same symptoms and emotional conflicts. So every single type, including what we call psychiatric disorders in conventional and holistic medicine. And this is partially why I am so passionate about this work as well, is because it helps us see what's really going on underneath what we label as mental illness. So in GHK, a constellation is when there are two active conflicts impacting both sides of the brain. And this creates what are psych disorders. But instead of slapping on a diagnosis or assuming someone is broken or unstable, we can get curious and we can trace it back. We can ask, okay, what happened? What conflicts haven't been resolved? And this shift changes everything. Because when we understand the biology, when we know better, we can stop judging and start supporting, right? We can meet people with compassion instead of fear. And to me, that is the medicine. This isn't just about health, like I was saying, it's about elevating how we treat each other and lifting the collective. Okay, and then just wanted to show you some examples of the CT scans with the Hammer focus on them. So the conflict shocks, they create visible lesions in the brain. They all correspond, so depending on where they are in the brain, they correspond to specific biological programs in the body. And like I was saying, as he investigated more cases, he found 100% correlation between brain lesions, organ symptoms, and the specific types of conflicts. Okay, and then over time, he mapped out all of the connections. And again, now we have this beautiful map, what we now know as the 5 biological laws. The 5 biological laws are what make up Germanic healing knowledge. This question here, let's talk about this. The suppression of his work. So, even though Dr. Hammer's findings were proven accurate in court, the results were suppressed. He was offered millions of dollars to walk away. He didn't take the millions of dollars to walk away. Yeah, he was met with fierce resistance. And so he wrote a study. Actually, he has a thesis. And if anybody wants it, feel free to reach out to me. 1981. And he approached the University of, I'm going to mess this up, Tübingen to prove it right or wrong. And the university denied his request. So he went to court and the German court ordered the university to test it. And although it was proven right and not even one error, the results were not made public due to the potential upheaval it would cause in the medical field. Which, if we can just pause for a second and think about that, like, yeah, this would change everything, right? And the fact that he didn't accept the money and just walk away and vacation somewhere shows us that, I mean, to me, this shows me that Dr. Hammer had a mission, that he was determined to help and change healthcare for the better. Right? So he refused the $2 million to abandon his work, and instead, of course, they had his medical license revoked. He was imprisoned and targeted multiple times. And if we ask why such backlash, and that is because this work challenges the fear-based foundation of modern medicine as we know it and its profit structures, of course, right? Keeping people in fear allows the government to stay in power, and especially in European countries, healthcare and the government are heavily intertwined. So that is that. Okay, and you probably first heard about it as Germany medicine, and the reason why there is so many names is because originally it was called the New Medicine, right? Named by Dr. Hammer. And then it later became German New Medicine to distinguish from new pharmaceutical drugs. And there's other modalities and things like that. And of course, German New Medicine is not a modality, but naming themselves New Medicine. So he wanted to differentiate. And then as he became jaded by the medical world, he renamed it to Germanische Heilkunde. Okay, so this translates to Germanic healing knowledge. The term Germanic is, Dr. Hammer picked this as a nod to the ancient tribal people who lived in alignment with nature. And it also is a reference to them because they didn't believe in duality. So there's no good, no bad, no good, no evil. Or sorry, there wasn't like good or evil. And that's the same thing with Germanic healing knowledge, is when we see symptoms, it's not that it's good or it's bad, it just is. So that is where that has come from. And then there's also La Medicina Sagrada, which is, again, my favorite one. And it's a name that captures the beauty of his work. In North America, G&M is more widely known. Ultimately, it really doesn't matter, right? It's a name. The purpose behind it is what the focus is on. So it's all the same, whether you hear me say G&M or GHK, talking about the same body of knowledge. I'm going to just briefly introduce the 5 biological laws that make up the framework of Germanic healing knowledge. And when I first heard about Germanic healing knowledge and I heard that it was based on laws, I was like, okay, wait, there's laws. I'm thinking like the law of childbirth, women give birth, men do not. That is a law, right? That's always true. And then understanding that conventional medicine, things like contagion theory, okay, so that you can catch colds or catch things from other people, and germ theory are just theories, and that is the premise. That is what most of modern medicine is based off of, and how we're carrying out our practices. And of course, this was all during the COVID era, so I'm seeing all of these connections and seeing all these things that don't make sense. And I'm like looking at the laws, being like, wait, we got these over here. And although you can't measure the psyche, right, you cannot measure the subconscious perception, this is still, whether or not you can measure that, this is still what feels the best for me and shows up in my life. Okay, so these laws are the foundation of everything in GHK, and we'll explore them more deeply in future videos. But for now, here's a simple overview to help you start to see the symptoms through this new lens. Okay, so the first biological law is actually called the iron rule of Cancer, and it explains that every symptom begins with a biological conflict shock. This is not the same thing as stress. Okay, there has to be a specific moment in time that would have caused an impact to occur. Okay, second biological law explains the two phases of nature. So when a conflict is active, the body enters a stress state. When it's resolved, the body shifts into a healing phase, and that's often when symptoms appear. So the connection that you can probably make here is, why do I always get sick on holiday? Or why do I get sick on vacation? And that is simply because you've shifted from being in sympathetic state, so fight or flight, to rest and digest or parasympathetic state. That is where healing occurs. First biological law is the iron rule of Cancer. So it states that every disease starts with a biological conflict shock, a DHS, again, named after Dr. Hammer's son, Dirk Hammer. So the DHS stands for Dirk Hammer syndrome. And this is an unexpected, highly acute, and isolating event that impacts the psyche, brain, and organs simultaneously. The location of the lesion in the brain determines which organ responds. So for example, a territorial loss shock can affect the coronary arteries. Please remember, this is different to generalized stress. Second biological law states that every program has two phases, and if a conflict is resolved, the body goes through those two clear phases. So conflict active phase is the first phase. This is where you have cold hands, stress, anemia, maybe you're overthinking about the event that happened, tissue changes like cell loss or cell growth. And here's a little image of it basically. So here's the DHS. Okay, that's the moment in time, that conflict shock. Okay, so maybe your partner said that they don't want to be together anymore. Okay, that's that emotionally unexpected, isolating event in time. As long as it was unexpected for you, okay? And then you go into that conflict active phase. So again, cold hands, overthinking, insomnia, stress, and there'll either be cell loss or cell growth depending on what is needed from the tissue, okay? And then there's the healing phase, okay? So the relief, you've come to terms with the breakup, okay? Maybe you started seeing someone new, all is well. You can laugh about the DHS potentially, and that is when you enter the healing phase. Okay, so this is also too, you could probably make this connection why you might get sick on vacation or you might get sick on holiday. You are relaxed, okay, when you're in that parasympathetic state. That is when deep healing can occur, or healing can occur. Okay, and healing, and the irony of this is those healing symptoms like fatigue, swelling, inflammation, microbes at work are often misinterpreted as illness, and that is when we run to the doctors for help, for medications, for testing, for all of these things, thinking that something is wrong. But actually, from the GHK lens, it is our body working for us. It's bringing us back to homeostasis. Okay, and then the third biological law is the ontogenetic system of germ layers. Okay, so the type of tissue that is affected depends on its embryological origin. Okay, and this goes back to what makes GHK, or this law makes GHK a map of the body's adaptation. So we can literally read it like a map, and it's all based on embryology. And just going back to that diagram again. So we see here, there's either cell loss or cell proliferation in the conflict active phase, depending on what is needed. Okay. An example of cell proliferation in the conflict active phase, so cell growth during the conflict, would be an indigestible morsel. So or indigestible anger. I can't digest this situation, feeling maybe resentful. And the tissue that's involved is the endoderm. And during that conflict active phase, the body adds cells to increase digestive ability, digestive capacity. How beautiful, how cool. Okay, our body is helping us to digest life, basically. So it's like saying, let's grow mucosa, more mucosa to help break this thing down. Remember, this is biological. And your body is simply helping you digest either the figurative or literal conflict. Then we have cell loss, which would be ulceration or necrosis, cell breakdown. An example of this would be a skin conflict. So this can be a literal skin conflict, so a bad smell, or figurative, a betrayal, toxic relationship, gross injustice, and the tissue involved is nasal mucosa. And that is controlled by the cerebral cortex, so the red. So here we are getting that cell loss in the conflict active phase and then tissue restoration in the healing phase. And the purpose, the biological purpose of cell loss of the nasal lining is to increase sensitivity so that you can better smell. Okay. So then the healing phase is that swelling, congestion, runny nose, and even sinus infections are often diagnosed as colds or sinusitis. That's just the tissue restoring itself and repopulating the cells that were lost. And this image here and the 5 biological laws you can read more about on www.learninggnm.com. It can be a little bit overwhelming going on that website for the first time and just reading it. So that is partially why it's my goal to make it more easily digestible and help you understand it in a more comprehensive way. 4th biological law we still have to do. So this one is wildly different to conventional and holistic medicine. It states that microbes assist the healing phase, okay? Bacteria, fungi, and viruses, if they were to exist, are not attackers, but helpers. Bacteria and fungi exist for sure. Viruses, they still have not been proven or isolated according to proper standards, different to what we were taught to conditioned to believe, right? The bacteria, the fungi, and the viruses, if they exist, are simply the helpers in the healing phase. How cool. So tissue restoration with bacteria, and then cell removal with fungi and bacteria. Okay, so tissues we no longer need are broken down by that were grown to help us are broken down by the microbes, and then cells that we no longer need are being removed by microbes as well. Definitely a different way to look at it. So to be clear, GHK is not saying that there is no microbes. They're just saying that they are helpers in the healing phase. They are not to be feared. Active only during healing. That's why they show up on lab tests and things like that. And they assist tissue restoration or removal of cells no longer needed. They operate in harmony with the brain and organ affected. So beautiful. 5th biological law, my favorite. Every program has a biological purpose. There's no error in the body. What we call disease is actually a meaningful, intelligent, biological response. It makes sense in nature, okay? It serves a specific purpose to help an organism adapt to a conflict shock. And all of these laws I will go deeper into in the coming Q&As and presentations, but this is just a quick, brief overview on the beauty of them. And so just a quick review of the discovery, Dr. Homer's discovery. With any symptom or disease, there's the conflict shock, okay, whether that's an emotional loss or a separation or indigestible anger, indigestible morsel conflict that is perceived, and at the same time it impacts the brain, it triggers a biological response that makes sense at the tissue level. And this is where we truly see the biological specificity. The same type of conflict will always show up in the same place in the brain and affect the same organ every single time. So again, just for an example, a loss conflict affects the testicles or ovaries, a separation conflict affects the skin, a motor conflict impacts the skeletal muscles, a death threat conflict affects the lungs. And these connections have been verified in tens of thousands of cases, and they form the heart of what we know as GHK. So once more, zooming out to the bigger picture, a biological conflict occurs. Okay, it registers in a specific relay in the brain. So think of the relay as a control center or a switchboard that links brain activity to a specific organ. And each relay corresponds to a specific tissue type, which is why symptoms aren't random and they're following a precise pattern. So it goes from psyche to brain to organ, but it's happening simultaneously. Okay. And once you understand this pattern, you can begin to decode what your symptoms are actually telling you. The more consciously we process and resolve a shock, the less intense and prolonged our symptoms are. So the power of understanding this knowledge or understanding our biology is that when we don't react to the same intensity to our symptoms. So for example, if I get low back pain, okay, I am not as distraught maybe as I would be if I were running around to all the doctors to try and get checked and assessed at what's wrong, because that's keeping me in that conflict active state, right? We want to support the body in our healing phase rather than re-triggering us back to that conflict active state. So all of this information I hope that I'm sharing with you is that it's calming you down, right? It's lightening the load, lightening the fear of things. That is what this knowledge is about. We are always just trying to lighten the load of the conflict shock, okay? Because the intensity of the conflict shock will always relate to the intensity of the symptoms. So if we know how certain conflicts create symptoms, then we can downgrade with more ease, right? We can lighten the load easier. Yeah. We understand there's just less to be afraid of. And really, it puts the power back in our hands. And so, of course, maybe this presentation brought some things up for you. And that's a good thing. It's okay. GHK can feel confronting. It requires complete personal responsibility and shedding of the victim mentality. So again, if you're here and you're interested and you're listening, kudos. I know for me, it was the amount of unlearning I had to do was a little bit difficult. And yeah, it wasn't easy to be, I guess, the Black Shlee during the COVID era. So kudos. It doesn't blame, it doesn't explain. Or sorry, it doesn't blame, it just explains. And with over 40,000 cases, Dr. Hammer never found an exception to his discoveries, which is pretty cool. And again, this isn't a rejection of medicine, but a call for a deeper understanding and a respect for the body. And I just want to leave you with this. I've brought it up already a couple times, but just asking what brings you closer to peace? The belief that your body is broken and needs fixing, or the knowing that symptoms are purposeful adaptations, part of a healing process to bring you back to balance? And if you're feeling resistance, I get it. I've been there. I spent years and lots of money learning a different paradigm, and even my naturopathic training, while I'm so grateful for it. And although it gave some power back to myself and the clients, it still saw symptoms as problems. And this is where GHK requires a full upgrade or full switch in how we see health. And of course, I just want to give deepest gratitude to Dr. Hammer for his courage, and to those like Carroll and Marcolin and my mentors who continue to teach this. Again, www.learninggnm.com is great. And if you would like, please join us inside my Substack. You can join my monthly Q&As with my colleague. We'll be going deeper into the 5 biological laws. We'll give you the opportunity to submit your questions ahead of time. If you're just wanting to surround yourself with this information more and dive deeper into it and start to connect the dots, the Q&A is a great landing place. And if this presentation leaves you with absolutely anything, I hope that it leaves you with the question or questioning when you do get a symptom, asking yourself, okay, what was happening in my life, or what happened that was unexpected or shocking that happened prior to me getting this symptom? That one question alone can open the door to a whole new understanding. Okay, hope to see you in the Q&As, and I'll also be emailing out a little form so you can submit some questions ahead of time in case you can't make the live Q&A. The first one will be the last Sunday of May, and again, you don't need to remember. I'll send out some email reminders about it, and we'll chat soon.